Can't hear me. You can't hear me. Okay, sorry. I was talking to Robin.
Well, Robin, who's not on the screen, hope she can hear us. This is Journeys in Podcasting. We have an afternoon session today with Amy Baskin, where we'll be talking about not just escape rooms, which has been a common theme lately, but the gamification of learning, the do's and don'ts, and hopefully she'll give us some great tips on how to put some of these things together, some practical use. Amy, how are you? And maybe you want to tell a little bit about your background. How did you come to be here?
Well, I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be part of this. I teach at Florida State College in Jacksonville, and last semester we created an escape room that ran about 5 weeks. We had around 300 people come through to play, and it was really, really intense. But now that the room has been struck like a theater set, I miss it. So I'm very happy to be talking about it today.
So just background theory on why escape rooms, but why gaming? How did you come to this cross of gamifying learning, which is a really confusing concept because there's a lot of gamification of learning, which is very extrinsically motivated. But it sounds to me like what you're into is a very intrinsically motivated sort of gamification that deals on a very human nature of wanting to engage with learning and wanting to collaborate. What are your thoughts on that? How did you come to this?
Well, there's a great quote that I like, which is that play is the primary engine of human growth. And about 10 years ago or so, I was teaching a lot of developmental English courses and basically teaching grammar. And that's not considered the most exciting topic for most students, especially if they need a grammar class, because it means they've had them before and haven't mastered it. So I just very gradually began incorporating small elements of play. And so I was walking through Target and found waste baskets that looked like basketball hoops. And I got those and I brought them into class, and one said sentence and the other said fragment. And I said to the students, just line up down the center aisle, and they had a ball. And I showed words, and if it was a sentence, they had to throw it in the sentence basket and fragment in the fragment basket. And even if they were really great at basketball, they just really loved being able to stand up, get out of their chairs, participate, interact. The novelty of it was so welcoming. It was shocking. They were like, this is, they kind of were embarrassed at first, and then they said, can I go again? But at the same time, it became sort of a distraction away from the stress of having to learn something like grammar, and it allowed them to have their guards come down. And I found they had a lot of breakthrough moments in understanding the content. And that grew and grew, and I ended up coming up with an entire program I called Grammar Olympics, where students we took over the lobby of one of our buildings, and I set up we ended up eventually with about 15 stations, and that could have been a fish or blocks or ping pong balls or small carnival style games that related to all of the grammar topics that were going to be on an exit exam that they took. And so it was wildly successful. We did it for 4 years. We measured some of the results. I think out of about 200 students who played the Grammar Olympics, maybe all but one passed the exit exam. So and one of my most memorable things was we were doing a quiz buzzer activity to teach pronoun subject agreement, pronoun antecedent agreement. It's out of my brain. Okay. And there was one student, and he was sitting there, and whenever he played, he got the answer wrong. And there were 4 places to play, and other people were sitting down, getting the answer right and going. And he just sat, and he watched other players do this skill over and over and over, and he had his light bulb moment. And just by that, what sometimes is called lurking, learning through lurking, just by sitting there and observing, he understood the pattern. And I think from that point on, he had it mastered, because he was able just to have constant repetitive exposure to this one particular skill without high stakes, without being judged. because it was just a game. And so one of the great things about game-based learning, I think, is that the stakes are low, which allows cognitive function to be more active and productive. So if we want students not to be productive, we can raise all of the stakes and we can have cognitive function shut down. And after the Grammar Olympics, they had to do a passport and go to all of the stations, and then they got a gold medal. They did a spelling bee, they did word definitions, they did parts of speech, transitional words and phrases, all kinds of things that English teachers like to share.
It sounds to me, you know, I'm just, as you're talking, I'm thinking of some recent talks that I've been viewing. One comes from John Seeley Brown, who talks about situated learning, which is exactly what I feel like you just described. And one of the elements of that situated learning that he describes is this legitimate peripheral participation, that before you can enter a culture, before you can enter a deep understanding, it's okay, and it's part of the learning process to be on the outer circle, to be on the perimeter, and to be looking in and listening to how these things work. You've also echoed some things that I was listening to this week from Jane McGonigal about games offering our opportunities to be our best possible selves. And, you know, games are rehearsal for the real world. I have questions about this type of experiential learning that you're creating in the classroom. While my experiences are in elementary, where we do these kinds of things a lot, however, I feel like it gets misconstrued a lot, and it becomes very much about the mechanics of the gaming element without really getting to the content pieces coordinated with the mechanics. I feel like what you're creating is some mechanics that create an environment that allows students to use their collaborative learning. Now, all of a sudden, they have a reason to argue over pronoun-verb agreement, or I forget how you described it.
Antecedent. Pronoun antecedent agreement.
Pronoun antecedent agreement. Is that what you're thinking by design? That's kind of my first part of the question. The second one is, how do you build in reflection? If you're going to have experiential learning, the reflective piece is very important as well.
I think the lasting learning is part of the reflection. So as an example, just to kind of skip forward to the escape room, what I did was I designed, and we had actually a team, so I really even don't want to say I, but the escape room was designed around a memoir. Every year our college picks one memoir. And so I wanted to attach this activity to some other strong program at the college. And it turned out to be the perfect book, the perfect author. It was the perfect moment at the college to do the escape room, because it's about a boy who was around 12 years old when the war in Bosnia broke out, and his family literally has to escape war. So we had those parallel themes between the play of escape in the room and something as serious as surviving war as a child. And so an example of reflection would be, we had students do a survey afterward, a short written survey. And one of the most powerful reflections one student wrote, "Oh, Kenan," the author's Kenan Trebretchnovic, "he had to escape Bosnia to survive." And they drew that parallel because the design of the game involved as much iteration with the themes and the story as we could. Another student made the reflective observation that, oh, all of a sudden overnight, this child's life went from being completely normal to completely cryptic. So he, to cope, to survive, had to look at every single thing happening in his environment, in his world, with people as crazy puzzles that he had to try to decipher. So it ended up being a really great way to take the theme of the book, the issues about human rights and war, And the escape room created two different theatrical environments. One was the apartment where the family lived, and they were there for months with no power. And so, in a way, when the students walked into the escape room, they were walking into the book. There they were in the living room where so much of the story took place. And for some of them, you know, that artistic moment, they were on stage, they were the players, they were the characters, and they had to do similar work that the author had to do. So,
No, just to jump in there, this idea of the fantasy narrative, I'm fascinated by this part, and we've played around with this a little bit at the former school I worked at, was to put the kids into a situation where they're basically kind of either creating an avatar, acting out a persona in an environment where they're creating that as well, or it's been you know, pre-made for them. How do you launch them into that? Like I get that the room is part of the book and that's part of the fantasy narrative. What is their role in that environment?
how does the escape room work? Or
Kind of, but like when you send the students in there, you know, what do you explain to them before? Do they take on a persona? Are they a character in the book? What is their identity as they walk into that space?
There's no role playing in the escape room that we made, but many of the students who played had read the book. We designed the room intentionally, though, so that it wasn't necessary to have read the book in order to participate in the room. You could still do all of the critical thinking skills and absorb a lot of the information from the memoir, because we gave a lot of clues, and I'll explain that one way we did that. But I explained to the students what an escape, and for my students, I explained to the students what an escape room was. Some of them had played them through video escape rooms online. A lot of students are gamers. They were very intrigued. But, you know, they walked into the room without really knowing what to expect. So we had a big classroom where we held the escape room. And the first thing I did is, they knew it was going to be a 30-minute activity. And we had a closet. And so as they came in, I said, okay, put your backpacks and purses or whatever all on those bookshelves, so you have your hands free. So all of the students put their phones and their drinks and whatever in the on the shelves in the closet, and then we locked the closet. So the way to win the game was they had to find the final code that unlocked a box that gave them the key to unlock the closet so they could get their belongings back. And that worked out really well, because a lot of them came in reluctantly and said, well, I'm just going to chuck it out and then I'm going to leave. And then for one memorable student in particular, he said that he was going to do that. And then he said, well, once my things were locked up, I thought I might as well play. And he just jumped right in. He solved more than other students. He was very proud of his number. He was very proud of the time. They were one of the shortest times to win the game. And that, I mean, I guess maybe that could be a gamification or a game mechanic where all of a sudden you're thrown into the room and you might as well play. You might as well participate. You might as well put your whole 100% self actively in the quest.
That was another question I wanted to ask. Was, it sounds like you just described it, is that I imagine this student was not the most engaged or leader in the normal classroom setting. I'm sure you've observed or took notes on you know, different types of leadership evolving, different types of student engagement involving that would not normally happen in the classroom. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, the particular student that I was just talking about was one of the biggest success stories of the whole room, as for me. He and I teach college, and I know a lot of people watching are K12. So this particular student was a veteran. He had severe PTSD. He had a traumatic brain injury. Lot of complicated things going on in terms of his relationship with the program that he was in at the college. And he was basically failing the class. And I would say, you know, sort of in a gently harassing way, I would say, oh, you know, you're behind on 23 assignments. Do you think you'll be able to catch up on some before next class? You know, it's always like kind of gently pressuring him to pass the class. And he finally just said to me, look, I'm going to fail, okay? You know, in other words, just back off, right? So the day he played the escape room, he was so triumphant. It was such a great experience. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile. He was playing, he paired up with another student who he had never really talked to before the previous 8 weeks in the class. The two of them just became a team, and they were just going from puzzle to puzzle, solving them. He told me afterward that a little bit about his military experience. He had been the fastest, the top, the best, and certain testing areas. And so he kind of reconnected to that. After playing the escape room, he came to my office and he said he wanted to make up quiz number 2. So I said, okay. And after he took the quiz, he said, well, I'll make up that essay that I didn't write. I'll give it to you in 48 hours. So I said, okay. I mean, I was totally backed off at this point. He ended up passing the class. He got a good grade. And on the very last day, I said to him, you know, it seems, I'm doing research around the escape room, and it seems to me the escape room is the reason why you passed the class. He said, that's true. So I said, well, why do you think that is? And he said that somehow it broke the ice for him. And I think part of that ice that broke could have been his social position in the classroom. He started talking to another student. They worked really well together. There was a bonding and a partnership. And it just broke the shell that he had around himself, that he wasn't going to put himself out there, take risks, engage, get involved. And so he also gave credit to the escape room for his passing the class. So that was, you know, that alone, if that was the only good outcome of the whole escape room, it would have definitely been, you know, a very valid reason to do such a thing. There was another student who was also a vet who came to me immediately after playing the room, and he said, well, I thought that was going to be BS, but it was really good. And I said, oh, that's good. Well, what was good about it? And he said, we were all working together toward a common mission. And in that reason that he gave, of course, we can hear that military thinking, military culture, you know, but he really, even though this was nothing like that, this was play, but even though the theme of the book did relate to war, I think it made him feel purposeful. There was a reason to collaborate and help each other. So it was a real social opportunity to belong, to contribute, to participate.
That's fascinating, especially when you look at sort of what we call 21st century learning, which is basically just piggybacking up on the best of 20th century learning. But this idea of the collaborative effort coming from a military background, where I assume the individual effort is not nearly as applauded as the effort of the unit. So to be thrown into this episodic event where they have to quickly use a different mindset. I know that Henry Jenkins talks about it as the hunter and the farmer, where the farmer is the methodical planner. It's the student who does very well with these kind of rote learning styles, able to manage their time in these kinds of segments, whereas the hunter is much more likely to be classified as ADD. But they have a skill set where they can walk into an environment and see everything, as opposed to, they're the ones you want when the plane goes down the Amazon, because they're going to survive, whereas the farmer will need a different structure to survive in. So I'm kind of rambling all over these things, but I do have a point that I'm getting to. One was like when you see these things happening and you're researching, this, this is fascinating as far as the larger learning outcomes. As they go in, I'm sure you have your content outcomes and your critical thinking outcomes that you want them to get out of the experience. But it sounds to me like what you're observing is something much bigger. How do you make that learning visible? How do you document it? And do you have a way of presenting it back to the students so they can see the beauty of it all?
I think that my greatest takeaway for this particular project was the strong need for social interaction. And I think learning can be a very lonely experience. And even though in my classroom I do lots of interactive activities, I do some game stuff, or they pair and share, or different things like that, it doesn't nearly have the same amount of depth as playing a game together and having, what's at stake is the desire to win. And they're not competing against each other, they're competing against the clock. So the clock becomes an artificial reason to be smart and do your best and share yourself. And somebody might say, oh, I know the answer to that, or that's on page 23, or they, just however they have their brainstorms, or they see something that somebody else doesn't see. In the surveys that we did, students would write things. I had the question, what did you learn about your classmates? Well, they said, I had no idea. They were so friendly and fun and smart. Or they said, everybody sees things a different way. Or I was able to see how they saw it, which was different from how I saw it. So they had this appreciation for multiple perspectives. Another really interesting thing, and I think I might be off topic for your question.
No, please go on.
But what I also observed in watching the students play is that they rarely solve the puzzle on the first try. So it became using the scientific method. So they would attempt to solve a puzzle, get it wrong, use that information as valuable data, and then circle back around and try another approach. Or somebody else would say, what if we try it this way? Or what if we turn it upside down? And so they were able to explore different approaches, whereas very often in educational situations, you have one chance. And if you fail the test, it's over. That's done. And I recently went to a great conference, and I went to a session on executive function, which is considered by neuroscientists as one of the most important things that we need to do to improve learning in general, give students opportunity to develop their executive function skills, which is right up here on the top of their brain. And in a nutshell, what that has to do with is adaptability. So if you can say, well, let me, here's, they open up a briefcase and they find this book, and it's got words on it, and what does it mean? And then one person kind of figures out, if you do this, it will say something. And then usually the person who figures out how the book works is different from the person who figures out what it says, who kind of blurts out what it says. And then another person standing there says, oh, then we'll turn out the lights. We have to do that. Oh, go get that flashlight. And it's kind of like popcorn learning, where everybody's contribution has value. So I think a lot of this is, let's keep on trying, let's work together. Very, very often when I attend conferences on game-based learning, such as Paul Darvasi's or John Fallon's, over and over again I heard from them that it's not the high-achieving typical A student, high performer who has that leadership role. Very often it's the person who's not always engaged, who suddenly comes forth and has this space to play, this space to live, space to move, space to explore. And so those are some of the things that I saw emerge. One of my favorite memories of holding the escape room was a student, and she was solving some of the puzzles, but sort of right at the midpoint when all the students were engaged in different puzzles in the space, she was just sort of walking around the room, sort of absorbing all this positive energy and this trying and the work and the celebration of unlocking a lock. And it was just, she was just drinking it all in and so happy just to be in that place, in that moment with those people. And that's what we want in life. Why shouldn't we have that, in a non-traditional classroom?
Yeah, and again, as you're talking, I'm just going down the list, and basically what you're describing, what I think is where learning is hopefully going, in what I read about in new literacies, where they talk about collective intelligence, where they talk about a dispersed learning environment, where they talk about play, this ability to tinker with your environment, so that you're not just using the scientific method, but you're using your heuristics, you're using your ability to tinker with something and maybe not even be linguistic about it. Like, we're very language addicted. So, you get into a space like that, and all of a sudden, time pressure, you have to collaborate, and even everything from the ability to use your hands to solve problems, at the same time that you're using language and other things. I have a question about this part. Are these observations that you have just noticed about this, or like, are you now designing rooms knowing that I want this group to really, I want to leverage collaboration, where I really want them to be teaching each other? And I'm thinking more of a personal anecdote of, I didn't really know much about learning until I got to university, where I met a buddy of mine, Jason Blevins, who currently writes for the Denver Post. And Jason, in a study session, literally blew up my whole mind about what a study session could be. He brought in chart paper, markers, covered the walls with things. He had all of his play mechanics. So he was gamifying learning in his own way, where he was literally, we were laughing, we're joking. The whole thing just was easy. And, it was Russian history. So it was an incredibly complex topic of some very abstract things that we didn't have a lot of schemata for. And yet he was able to create a kind of game environment that really changed the way that I've approached, I need to learn this content or need to learn these concepts, really changed everything afterwards. And I feel like what you're putting your students into is an environment where they're learning how to learn as a group, but they're also learning how to learn from each other. That we don't necessarily learn how to learn from teachers. We learn how to learn by spending that time with your partners, working things out, seeing what you're describing as the multiple perspectives to a topic, and also seeing their methods of learning. What are your thoughts on these things?
I saw that happen consistently. So if somebody had their light bulb moment, understood, wanted to make an attempt at solving something, and it worked, they almost immediately started explaining why it worked to the other people who they were working with. And then they got excited because they understood it. I think these are extremely, the emotions are engaged, and that helps lock in the memories and the understanding of the materials. And then once everybody understood how the problem was solved, they kind of moved further on, stronger and better as a team that could communicate, that had each other's best interest. And there wasn't so much a leader and a follower. It was really, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows who's going to get the breakthrough and understand how to solve things?
And, you've already described the transference of, you create these episodic events, and yet you're seeing the skills transfer over into the classroom. Has it changed the way you teach in the normal classroom? Like, when you have to return to a normal classroom setting, have these observations, watching this collaboration happen, watching these different learning techniques that we don't necessarily get at when we normally plan a lesson, how has it changed you as a teacher?
Well, I definitely try to incorporate, if I can, in every single class, some opportunity for socializing. So, for example, I will take a deck of cards, and if I have 20 students, I'll take 10 pairs, and I'll mix them up and send them out. And then whoever's a 2 has to find the other 2 in the room. Whoever's a 3 has to find the other 3. So they're randomly shuffled, and they sit down, and I say, okay, first introduce yourself to each other, and then they might have to, I think last week I had them, I'm teaching thesis statements in a freshman composition class. So they had a prompt, and together they had to use the criteria for a thesis statement and compose one together. And I really think they love that, you know, in a way, they have to socialize because that's the activity that we're doing, which they really want to do, but maybe that wouldn't be cool to just go up to somebody you don't know, or it's too awkward. But things like that, where I just say, okay, if you're 7, find the other 7. They just go ahead and follow the directions, and the next thing I know, they're working positively with somebody else on content, on mastery. They can, if one person doesn't know what's going on and one person really does, it's a chance for the one who doesn't know what's going on to have a teachable moment from a peer instead of the professor. And then we discuss it, and so I think they're just really happy when, you know, I take the cards out, because it's like, oh, good, we get to talk to another person, have a human interaction with each other.
I wonder if maybe I can share some images, and I wonder if you could narrate through some of these. Can you see that image?
Yes, in the front of that you see a couch and a table and a rug and a plant. That side of the room was meant to be the apartment where a lot of the book takes place. And so and in the back was our second setting, which was in present time, so about 20 years or so after this war happened. The author writes about, there was a bar in New York City where a lot of the people from the former Yugoslavia would go, and even later they still carried the grudges of things from the war in terms of culture or heritage. But we tried to create this bar called Marshall's, which had a collage, which you can see in the background there. And if you notice on the bookshelf, there's probably a better picture of the bookshelf, but on the bookshelf there's all of these strange and interesting objects. And so students would enter the space, and they had to be curious, look things over, try to find clues. You can see the 4 stools there. I actually brought one of them with me to the room, and I'm trying not to pull out my headphones. But when we were designing the room, we went to our surplus storehouse, and I saw those 4 stools, and I said, oh, that can definitely connect to some type of a puzzle.
Oh, yeah. I wonder if you might talk about the assembly. Did you have a team that helped you put this together? Were
Yes.
students involved? I mean, this looks like, I mean, this is amazing, but how did you do it? Like, you know, where did you get the materials, and who did you get to help you put it together?
This was an incredible team effort. It was just amazing. I had tremendous support from the college, from my campus president, from my dean, from support staff, from artistic staff, from other faculty, who said, yeah, I'll participate in this. Let me see what I can contribute. So one person did all of the scheduling, because 300 people is a lot to make sure that everything's ready and set. So one person just did all of the scheduling, which was, this is a huge, huge project. Another person on the team had fantastic graphic art skills, and she was able to make a brochure and a poster that you can see behind me. And we had bracelets for when the people won. That was their prize for escaping. And we really poured through the book to try to find any symbols, any images that were mentioned. The more we could put into the room, we did.
Wow.
So it was a tremendous team effort. And here you see there's a rocking chair, and that was a very important symbol in the book. His grandmother had a rocking chair. And the green board on the right-hand side, you see we did a crossword puzzle, and the students found clues around the room, and we had magnetic Scrabble pieces, and they could use all those pieces to fill in the answers when they found the clues. And you might be able to see that some of the pieces on the crossword puzzle have different colors. There's like pink and orange, and those were actually coordinated with the stools. So if you could see the number order on the stools, you would know what the word would spell out.
Oh,
did that
wow.
make sense? So, and then we actually, and the author loved Back to the Future. That was one of his favorite movies when he was right before the war broke out. And so we had that as a reference. He loved soccer, so we had a soccer ball. So anything we could find from the book, we put in the room. And what was great is when the author came to visit the college, he played the escape room. And when he was in the apartment, he said, "I do not know how you did this, but it's perfect." So, I don't know if he was, I don't know that this was the exact rocking chair that his grandmother had, but being in that space, I mean, it must have been strange to have somebody make your childhood living room, recreate it, and have people in it playing a game. But when and then at the end, we actually presented him with the Back to the Future poster and some other things. And that was just, a great moment. So anything here, you can see a little bit better that there's just odd things on the bookshelves. You can see on the top, there's a box with a lock.
And so when the kids walk in, or when the students walk in, what are they prepped with? Like, what do you tell them before they come in? They've read the book, and then what is the challenge?
Well, they have to be curious. They have to find clues that could solve puzzles. And we do tell them they had to find 12 items. And when they found all 12 items and put them together, that would give them the clue for the very final lock. Where they can go get their backpacks and things back.
And then how many students go into the space at one time?
We had as few as 5 and as many as probably 25. So 15 for our space was probably ideal. Too few is not great, and too many can mean that not everybody gets to participate. But, they'd come in and they'd look around and they'd kind of be like, "What is this?" And then they'd start turning things over and they'd find a clue, and they would just slowly walk around. And then they might say, "Oh, this must go with that." And they would start
how did the book come into play? It's just there on the table, or?
Right. So I don't know if you can see, I'm holding up a tray. It was actually in a previous picture. So we got a whole bunch of trays.
Let me see if I can get your screen back on there. Hold on. Okay, go ahead.
So one of the most fun parts of making this was going to thrift stores and just finding crazy stuff. We ordered about half of the stuff on Amazon, and we got the rest really from thrift stores. So I just found different trays, and then there would be a crossword puzzle clue on the back that would go to the crossword puzzle, the green board that you saw with the magnetic Scrabble pieces. But we did want anybody who hadn't read the book to still be able to play. So you see here the 4 of hearts. If they didn't know the answer, they could go to the book, find the 4 of hearts, and still be able to, and then we had the answer highlighted. So it would take a little bit longer, but they were still interacting with the text, and they were still able to play. And so then once they would find, oh, there's a crossword puzzle clue on the back of a tray, quick, somebody get all of the trays. And then just naturally, a little team of people who wanted to work on the crossword puzzle would gather all the trays and start working on that activity.
Very impressive. Can we look at some more slides?
Sure.
Let's see.
I love the slides.
Yeah. So again, I'm assuming these are all elements from the book.
Yes, this is actually a really important picture from the book. It's there in black and white, but one of the great things was the publisher was so supportive, and the author was so supportive of us doing this project that they sent us a color copy of the pictures from the book, and we framed them and put them on the shelves. And right in the center of that photo, the man with the dark jacket has his hands on the shoulder of a boy. That's the author when he was getting this brown belt in karate, or I think maybe that was his blue belt ceremony. But a really important part of the story, and this is a very serious part, was his karate coach was his beloved sort of second father, his hero. But once the war broke out, the author was Muslim and the karate coach was Serbian. And so overnight, this coach became his enemy and came to his house and threatened the family. And the book is called The Bosnia List because as an adult, he goes back to Bosnia because his father wants to go, and he makes a list of revengeful things he's going to do because he's carrying with him all this unresolved, of course, anger for everything that he went through. So one of the things on his list was he was going to stand on the grave of this karate coach, you know, and sort of who had died. And so he's going to be have this triumphant moment. And so when the author goes back, tries to fulfill all of these revenge items on his list, he finds that man who is standing behind him. He finds his grave. He stands on the grave, expecting to feel this sense of survivorship and triumph and revenge. But instead, he has this flashback moment to that picture, which was the happiest moment of his childhood. And so eventually, this is a total spoiler here if you plan to read the book, but eventually he does a second list describing all of the amazing things for which he was grateful, certain people who did help the family escape, a bus driver, and, you know, just the things like that. So that particular picture related to one of the most powerful moments in the memoir. So even though it was play, you know, play can be extremely serious and play can be difficult. But we were able to not just create the theatrical setting, but some of the emotional touch points for people who read the book. Maybe they saw the photograph in the book, but there it was on a shelf as if this was a normal living room.
Wow. So I didn't, to prepare for this, I did not read the book, but now I really want to pick it up and read it, as I'm sure any students who maybe didn't read the whole book that go into that space probably want to go back and read it afterwards. So here you do have some documentation of students in there. Are you in there with them while this is going on? Is there someone guiding, coaching, or how does it work?
Yeah, most escape rooms that I've probably played about 30 rooms, and I forgot to mention that was part of how I got really interested in trying to do an escape room of my own. But very often you just have maybe a monitor and you can communicate by camera. But some rooms have a game master inside the room who can either nudge or solve a problem or prompt students a little bit to make progress. And so that's the way we did it. So in back to sort of game-based education, this can often be called the conversational agent. So the space or the lesson has all been pre-designed, and the teacher functions not as the source of knowledge, but the person who is there to help the students create their own knowledge.
Again, it sounds a lot like what training for 21st century learning attempts to be as well. So this kind of coach or the game master, as you call them, is that usually you, the designer of the space? Have you ever explored this idea of students creating or contributing to the creation of the environment as well?
That would be the ideal evolution of the project. If we could, it was way more work than I expected it to be, and there was a huge team involved. So we had our student life staff, we had some faculty members and some administrators who were really into this project, and they were all participating as game masters because we had so many groups come through. But in my dream in the future, I would love to do, here's an example of, what I would love to do. So one of the courses, not just at the college where we are, but this is probably at least nationwide, math is probably the course that prevents most people from completing their degrees. And so imagine if there's a math class and let's say there's 4 sections of a math class, and one class creates puzzles related to chapter 1 in the book. And then the other 3 sections get to play as a way to learn and establish mastery in those skills. And then each section of the course could be given a particular chapter to try to really understand and create puzzles for learning related to that content. So, but it would take a lot of work and coordination. So we've just kind of finished this room. I'm still kind of thinking about all the takeaways and where we want to go forward with this. But that would be really fantastic.
Well,
if the students were the makers.
K12 environment, there's a lot of redesign of the library space, and the library renaissance has become, this awakening of, well, we can't do a lot of these things in the classroom because of all the high accountability. The teachers have to be, constantly on this track. But libraries are still the space where a lot of these things could happen. And as I'm looking at your mesh of art installation and human interactive space, which is really what it is, I can see this as a potential thing to move into library spaces or have a section of the school that's kind of a multi-purpose space that could be reappropriated for this, on demand.
Absolutely.
How long did the room run, and how many students came through?
It ran about 4 or 5 weeks, and we had a total of 311 players came through from all walks of life, from all campuses. Sometimes we had a wonderful psychology professor who brought her entire class. We had a sociology professor who brought an entire class. And they may have done some extra reflections afterward on maybe how the experience related to their content areas.
Well, I'm just thinking like in the dream atmosphere of doing an interdisciplinary project where you have different professors working on the design and then throwing students in from different disciplines. So you've leveraged that dispersed knowledge base where the engineering student is going to come with this kind of knowledge. The art history student will come with this kind of knowledge. Really fascinating stuff, like a leveraged radical collaboration. I hopefully you can stay on just for a couple more minutes.
Sure.
To kind of flip through some of these pictures and maybe give kind of a running commentary.
Yeah, and then I also have a whole bunch of the things from the room here. Can you go back to the other one, the previous one?
This one here?
Yes. So I just want to tell you about that. So I was walking through a thrift store, and I found this beautiful, very nice Lazy Susan. And as I turned it over, I thought, it could be a fantastic code breaker. Isn't that gorgeous? It's got ball bearings. I got so excited about this. And so those in that previous picture, the students are seeing this, and on another, there's like a plate next to them where they see the B that was for Bosnia. And they could see on this plate here, you might be able to tell there's 4 letters, and there's something else that's a code breaker. But they could then try to see what those 4 letters, when using the code, would spell out, which would open a box with a lock on it that would lead them to another code. So that was really delightful. This is just an odd salt shaker, funny, that looks like a pear for some reason. But this is you can only find this type of thing right at a thrift store. But it's got this fantastic hiding place where we put a key that opened a fake dictionary that was on the shelf, and inside the dictionary there were puzzle pieces that they needed to solve another puzzle. So it's a lot of, really interlocking things, and in terms of the design. The pear's there in that picture too. Here we have a student who's opening, this is actually a team of faculty who were playing that day. And we had a couple of faculty groups come through as a team building exercise. And so we had all kinds of, there are really, really wonderful locks that can be found that have letters and numbers, and sometimes they have images. So there's great opportunities for coming up with meaningful words that connect to whatever it is, whatever the subject is. So I'll show you this one other thing I found at the thrift store. It's just this, I would look mostly for jewelry boxes where I could put on one of these hasps so I could put the lock there. But this was just this, it has this weird flower, and then inside it had a strange painting and these sort of nested holes. I don't know what it was for, but we had blocks that fit perfectly. And this is the name of the town where the author grew up, where the book takes place. It's in Bosnian, so it looks kind of weird to us. And then when they open this box, they find these 5 letters, the name of the town, which connects to this lock. So when they put those letters in, that lock opens, and then they open something else that leads to another clue. I'll just share a few more things. Because karate was his passion as a kid, again, in an attempt to iterate everything we could, we got a karate belt, and there's some letters on it. So that's cryptic, and what is that about? But near the belt, there was this baton, and if they figured out that they could align that, and if they wrap it around and they look at the red arrow, that would spell a word that would open another lock. There's all kinds of fun things, like we had a belt that had a zipper where a key could hide. This was in one of the pictures. It was just a box of kind of cool coasters, and we turned that into a math puzzle where they had to solve for a circumference. And so this connected to also the jigsaw puzzle that was in one of the other pictures. But this is something, I guess, that could be found in a normal household. So part of the fun of this project was just the joy of creating the challenges. And I think this is kind of an answer to a question you asked a while ago, but just to have a place where it's joyous to be and to learn with that kind of environment. I think it translates whether it's in something like an escape room or the Grammar Olympics Carnival. It's meant to be fun. That's critical. And then I think also that flows over into the classroom too. If we can do it with joy, why not, right?
No, amazing, absolutely amazing. And I'm just thinking, like, you've turned the learning space one, into a learning system where
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about the individual, you and the content, but that they have to rely on the whole environment. But this idea of also just kind of creating an installation, an art form where the humans are part of it, where they have to go in and interact with it. I think that's pretty amazing as well. Where have you written, published? Do you have plans on getting more of this out there? That's one question. And the second question would be, what are your greatest inspirations for game-based learning, either experiences or books or teachers you've had? Where do you absorb all that from? It's two big questions.
Right. The answer to the first question is I'm working on a book, which is not going as quickly as I would like, of course. I think that's the way most books get written. But one of the driving questions for me as a teacher, especially I teach at a state college, which has a community college mission. And very often students aren't ready for college. And I thought, well, what is readiness? And so I'm very interested, so if there's an opportunity to play, do you have to be ready to play? I really don't think so. You can just play. But I think a lot of times we have to be ready to learn, and there's this delay factor. We can't learn until we are somehow prepared for that. And I think play can fill in that space that makes one ready. All of the insecurities and doubts and fears of failure that are huge barriers for students to make progress in courses. I find that play just makes them vanish and they become very unimportant, and sort of then you walk away, and before you know it, you were learning and you didn't have to say, wait, am I warmed up to go? So anyway, that's the main idea, and that's what I've seen. So I've seen students come into my classroom and they think maybe I don't belong here, or maybe I'm not as smart as everybody else, or if I try I might fail, and there's lots and lots of thoughts around that. When play is involved, all that noise is just gone, and they're available to absorb new things and grow.
So, I feel like you're talking about, I'm trying to think of his name, Hertzinger, the Homo Ludens book, where he talks about play as the building blocks of culture, that we're basically as adults at play, especially when it works out well and we really find that job we like. I'm sure you've seen it in academia. I definitely see it in the teaching world, in the K12 teaching world, where the best teachers are at play. And I feel like what they're teaching the students to do is, this is fun, like this is play, and that there is a transference there from teacher to student in how to play with this material, that whether it's gamified in the classroom or not, just the way we interact with it, the way you read aloud to kids, the way you do your think aloud with kids, you're teaching them that, hey, this is fun. Like, it doesn't have to be a giant stress.
Exactly.
Even the way we talk about it, it doesn't have to be an interrogation. It can be fun. Like, we're playing with this text. I'm looking at just the literacy elements there. But I feel like you've also hit on something much bigger that's in education culture, and it's this transmedia, transcoding part of learning, that what can this object, what information can we unlock? And I know you have locks in there, so playing with that word, but like, what can we unlock from these objects, from this image, from this section of text that is, very much part of, I think, maker culture and has always been part of arts integration culture, in that how do we look at this other modality, whether it's something tactile or visual, and how do we start making connections between this text, that object, this picture? This is very transmedia, post-Gutenberg parentheses to me as well.
Excellent.
Sorry, kind of rambling off of, we have a lot of podcasts where we talk about these things. And so what I try to do is connect them from podcast to podcast. So we had the luck of having Henry Jenkins on here a couple of months ago, and he just blew our mind. The way he could think and talk about education, and the kind of things you're doing fit into that, just perfectly. Sorry, I interrupted because you were in the midst of answering a big question about where you found inspiration for these things.
Well, just to go back to that, what you were saying before, and I'm not sure there's that much metacognition at all times, but if the student went into a space, had joy, learned a tremendous amount, had a valuable social experience, felt connected, it was incredibly positive. Of course, they're having all of the wonderful neurotransmitters of acetylcholine and dopamine and oxytocin rewarding them, even if they don't necessarily break it down and comprehend why that was a good experience, they still leave wanting more, wanting to come back, wanting to have more similar experiences like that, where learning is such a positive, enjoyable activity. My inspirations, I think I've always liked play. I can look back through my life and find ways that I have tried to incorporate it, whatever I was doing. One of my favorite quotes from Jay McGonigal's Reality is Broken has to do with visual ambiguity. And what she says is, if we see, for example, a door that's ajar or a wrapped present, we don't know what's in it, all of a sudden we're curious, we're engaged, we want to know, we want to find out. And so all of that motivation is fueled by visual ambiguity. And certainly all of these things from an escape room, pear-shaped salt shakers, or a deck of cards telling you
Are loaded with visual ambiguity.
and I think that's also an invitation. And if you really immerse yourself, or if you stay back, whatever you do in that space, that's okay. It's what you do. And there's no one right way to do it. So there's all of this freedom within the designed non-traditional classroom to explore and discover, observe, stretch, express your personality, and just have a joyous experience that you want more of. So I love Jay McGonigal's book. Gabe Zickerman has been a big influence on me. He actually came to speak here at Florida State College. Do you know him? He does G Summit. A lot of his focus in gamification relates to more of the marketing and business world, but I see that there's a tremendous amount of overlap there. And then just having gone to many escape rooms, I tried to think about what of the activities that I like the best would I want to try to create myself. So I don't know if I'm going to do another escape room right away. I might try to do some other type of game-based learning project, but I don't know what it is yet.
Well, talking to you and having read and talked to Paul Darvasi, I see great overlap in the kinds of environments you're designing. His are longer projects, but they're augmented reality based, very Jane McGonigal of playing with the environment, playing with the physical, but the digital elements as well. I'm sure you've seen him dress up as Big Nurse.
I actually went to his classroom in Toronto and got to observe the first couple days of his ward game, and it was amazing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, so I'll be very excited to follow up on what you design next, and also if you're interested in consulting on the beginning designs of this kind of game space, that would be very exciting as well.
I would love to.
Cool. Where can people find you? Like, they've heard this and now they want to get online or get on Amazon, or where do they find more about this kind of stuff you're doing?
Well, hopefully I'll have some more things that will be, like a book would be great. But if anybody wants to get in touch with me, my email address is the best way to reach me. And it's abaskin@fscj.edu. So that's for Florida State College at Jacksonville.
Very cool. Thanks for taking the afternoon today. I could talk all afternoon if you want to keep going, but I imagine you have other obligations today. And I hope we cross paths again, either at conferences or maybe we can invite you back here to the podcast to interact as well. I'm going to stop broadcasting now if you just stick around for like another minute online.
That would be great. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.